What's up, nerds? So, I just wanted to address something real quick because I think it's very important, and I think a lot of people aren't necessarily thinking about it. And I think the way that I do, and it's just a sort of a defense, or it's just sort of a statement that I find, because today is the release, at least in Japan, tonight, in like literally 15 minutes for me, is the release of SMT 5, or Shin Megami Tensei 5, for the Switch. And a lot of people are saying that it's not Persona, and a lot of people are talking in very reductionist ways and kind of detracting from the Persona community, which is admittedly bigger than mainline SMT will ever be, probably. Persona just has a little bit more draw to it. That's totally understandable. But people are saying that they're not the same game. And a lot of that has to do with the theme, storytelling, gameplay, is what they usually cite. I just feel like they're wrong. I think that it's a stupid and reductionist point, and I think that a lot of this has to do with sort of this almost community elitism, which is seen in SMT games. We'll kind of explain a little bit. So Apocalypse came out as sort of a sequel or a retelling. It's a what-if scenario, which has been done in the SMT mainline games before. Actually, that's what SMT If kind of created, the Persona storyline. So there's a general timeline. Just for some brief context. If was the Japanese-only release. I think there was a PAL port, though it's usually just a fan translation, of the initial, you could sort of say like third or fourth SMT game for the Famicom or Super Famicom. And If was a branching storyline which had multiple different endings and had different characters which you could sort of go through. The reason that people say it might have been the consideration of what Persona became, or the reason that Persona was made, is because If was set in a modern day high school, or modern for the time, being 80s, late 80s or early 90s. So if we use that as the basis, where Persona then becomes its own series as a sort of spin-off of mainline, you can understand where people start to draw the parallels. And I think that's definitely important to note. But if we look at especially Persona 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we look at SMT 2, 3, 4, 5, and the sequels to those games, as well as offshoots like Apocalypse, and then you can also look at offshoot products like Strange Journey and Strange Journey Redux, as well as Devil Survivor, you'll see that those games do deserve a completely separate noting. You look at, for example, Strange Journey and Redux, and that is truly an Etrian Odyssey-style dungeon crawler or dungeon crawler RPG, filled with map-making, custom adventures, and a little bit more in-depth. So that and Soul Hackers are their own separate kind of game, the 2.5D dungeons and the dungeon crawlers, which are, you could classify as one version of an SMT game. Still an SMT game, absolutely. You still have demon recruiting, you still have fusion for most of the games, and you still have, for all intents and purposes, the same general combat system of a turn-based RPG. The big difference and the big thing that draws people for Persona and for SMT mainline is one of the reasons that I think that comparing the gameplay between the two and saying they're different is just stupid. The reason for that is because press turn combat has been in Persona since Persona 3, well, to an extent, and is available in Persona 5, though the options are a little bit different and there's certain things that go through, and it's been in mainline as far as I can remember since SMT 3 Nocturne, so early, I'm going to say that's what, 2008? So for a long time, those two games series have been essentially following the same general combat style. Press turn where you get a weakness, critical hit, or other certain exploits when you get a bonus turn of sorts you can think. And if you either miss, use a element that they resist and or can absorb, you then lose your turns. So you have a punishment and a reward system which allows for extra turns, similar to things like Bravely Default allowing for having a mechanic for extra turns. Now, completely identical. Why do I bring that up? That's also used in a couple of offshoot games as well. The biggest example I can think of is probably going to be Digital Devil Summoner and or Digital Devil Saga, I should say, which is 1 and 2. And in that particular instance, press turn being one of the biggest sort of influences as to modern SMT game combat is uniquely identical. Now, there are some differences in terms of spells, in terms of what demons may or may not inherit, things like demon evolution, which does come in, but those are all tertiary game mechanics. Those are not related to the main combat, and thusly I don't really equate them as being different. So by that stretch, Persona and SMT mainline, at least as of Persona 5, and SMT 4 or Apocalypse, there's no variation. The other main the other main gameplay sort of variable that you can look at is things like demons. You can look at everything from the demon recruiting, demon fusion, and or the overall elemental cycle for demons, you could say, or the elemental weaknesses and parameters for demons. Demon fusion has been in since Persona 3. It's been in mainline SMT pretty much. I think Cathedral of Shadows has been in the first online or onward, and then it's been in pretty much every spin-off game to some extent. So with things like Devil Survivor, completely different circumstances, though you do still have the demon fusion. You use the auction system, or kind of the buying of demons, since there isn't a recruitment feature in the same way. And those games, for comparison, are sort of a tactical grid-based RPG. So we see that. We see all of those mechanics returning for the offshoot games like Strange Journey. Again, that's like a 3D dungeon crawler, as well as Soul Hackers, same principle. So, in that essence, demon fusion, demon elements, demon recruitment is available in some form or capacity to every game. So this is another example. It's the second example where SMT mainline and at least modern Persona 4, 5, and 3 especially, are not at all different. So it begs the question, what else could it be? Well, thematically, you could look at that and say the storytelling or the overall presentation is different. I really don't think so. Of course, each game and each storyline, just like any other JRPG, is pretty much going to be either self-continued in a sort of serialized format where it's able to tell its own story and it's not needing to rely on the past, or it's going to be a direct continuation or the start of storytelling. Excuse me. I'm stuttering because I'm out of breath because I'm asthmatic and fat. In this instance, you can look at something like Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest 1 through, I think, 11 recently are not sent in the same general timeline as in you play as the successor from 1 all the way through to the most modern. You look at things like SMT. SMT 1 through 5 are more or less different versions. They all follow kind of the same, we're in Tokyo or we're in a post-apocalyptic world, and Persona doesn't. And if you think that is the thematic storytelling, then that is understandable. But it still has world-ending or essentially world-breaking demons or gods or different things, either presenting a danger to the party or to your surroundings and are either directly or indirectly targeting you, and you are in charge of either stopping them, helping them, or maintaining status quo. So that's kind of the law, chaos, neutral routes, which you see in mostly mainline SMT, though some of the offshoots do have storytelling that you can use or decide what the outcome is. For example, Devil Survivor has multiple routes through different characters, and Reclocked has the same thing. Digital Devil Saga had a couple variations, but the other big would be like Strange Journey, having Chaos Law routes, as well as the True Neutral. You can then do things like the alternative routes, such as True Demon or Chaos Demon in SMT Nocturne, and so that being a branching storyline is something that, yes, mainline has versus certain things like Persona does not. Persona is more limited because of the story that it's telling, being more modern characters developed in a modern world, and thus, yes, the story is different, and the settings are different. However, the themes are relatively the same. You're still going up against either a god, a large-scale demon, or a large-scale force of demons, which is presenting some kind of an issue to, frankly, Tokyo, or Greater Japan, or post-apocalyptic Zone X in that. So in that essence, if you think that 66% is enough of similarity to be considered same enough or close enough, I kind of don't think that the subtlety in differences, or the fact that one is post versus pre-apocalypse, knowing that the apocalypse happens immediately after if you fail, is much as a difference. Basically, you could take a Persona storyline and you could say, oh, we failed, and then you're in Shin Megami Nocturne, or then you're in 4, or to an extent, I guess, like Digital Devil Summoner. And Soul Hackers is kind of more keen to Persona, but all of these have the same general storytelling mechanics and story-driven interactions. So then you just kind of look at character design, and that's really the only thing that's different. And I will give people the credit, character design in Persona is totally different than SMT. You only have blue-haired or red-haired hot anime boys that barely speak, that are recruited and followed by a harem of hot either demon or high school girls in every game. That's just how Atlus works. Now, I will recognize that Persona is uniquely more qualified to have characters in an anime style, and you could say that the light novel or the visual novel and sort of dating sim aspects of Persona make it uniquely different than SMT, and that I won't even argue. You're 100% correct. But that's the only point that I can think that the variations are large enough to consider them different games. I don't think that the anime aesthetic from one to another, or saying that one is more cutesy or cartoony than the other, is really an adequate or fair place. SMT games have always been dark and comedic at the same time, and try and instill very whimsical, and of course, mostly with the fairy race or fairy subtypes, cutesy character design. That's just how that goes. Of course, if you have a character that's in high school and is trying to jump your bones as Joker, they're going to be a little bit more outwardly flamboyant or kind of colorful and palette swapped to somebody that's been roaming in the desert, like Shin Megami Tensei 4, literally scrounging for scrap metal to survive, killing demons with a metal pipe. It just doesn't work. Of course, the aesthetic's different for the story, and I don't think that that's an argument which can be used, because by that point, then the argument's correct, and that they are different. I just think that if that's the variation that you're going for, it still doesn't work. I literally had to catch my breath, because I am dying. Why do I say all this? Well, it's just a very simple point. So I love SMT. I love everything about SMT to the point where, like, I'm getting an Alice tattoo. I have multiple Jack Frost. I have the Raido Kusunoha limited edition. I tried super hard before I found out that scalpers completely ruined the market for the special edition in the backpack, which I'll probably have to buy later. For SMT5, I've got SMT4, SMT4 Apocalypse. I've got Strange Journey Redux, both of the Survivors and Overclocked, all of the limited editions. I've got Soul Hackers 2 limited edition with the music box in. Actually, all of them have the CDs. I've played every Persona game since 2, Innocent Sin, because of the second part I got a fan translation of. And then I have not played If or Persona 1, though I've emulated If, and I need to still play it through once I can find better English scripts. I've played everything mainline with the exception of 1, and then the port or the Famicom version of 2. And I've played, I think, most of the spin-off games. So again, I mean, Soul Hackers, all the Survivors. God, I even watched like the Survivor anime and things like that. I mean, Persona 3 and 4 anime, I think. The reason it matters to me and the reason that I care is because I really love the title SMT. It doesn't matter whether it's the actual mainline for Shin Megami or whether it's Persona. I think that if you want to be a fan, that's fine, but focusing or making differences, even if it's not necessarily intended to, in a way that's negative or critical of something that you love, is just overly painful to see happen for me. Now, I am absolutely correct in saying that I welcome and I recognize the criticism. I think that certain things Atlus has done have been either just bad or poor choices. I'll never play Dancing Till Midnight or Dancing Till Moonlight, whatever the Persona dance games are. And it's easy to recognize that there's faults in the series. All that said, it's negative energy to create negative energy. And you're becoming a contrarian to the point where you're just losing the trarian part of it. So the problem is you can hate it or you can love it. But if you recognize that it's different, and if you try and dissuade people from playing it just because you think it's different or because you don't like X, like Persona, which a lot of people seem to be gatekeeping against, you're keeping out all these Persona fans that might really like the game. You're keeping out people that could be like your super best friends on Discord or Reddit, and you're stopping discussion of the game or ruining fandoms before they even get the chance to form. Even if it's one person for one comment that was seen on one video. It's just like, why the fuck would you do that, right? Any kind of gatekeeping, any kind of maliciousness that's seen is just incredibly toxic, and there's no reason for it. It's weird to think that the game that has a giant green penis demon where I kill God descending from a giant crystal in the sky, and then the next minute I've got my Spanish, for all intents and purposes, love man, fusing with a red demon who has a diaper on his head, and then going to town and using machine gun skills to kill my crew makes me happy. It makes me genuinely enjoy the people I know. One of the weirdest and oddest interactions I've ever met is meeting somebody at cons who was handing out business cards with Louis Cypher on it. If you don't understand, that's fine. But I blew my load because I was 24 and drunk. And that was one of the coolest things, to see that other people had interest in a community or a fandom that I thought was kind of smaller. The games are not as big as things like a Final Fantasy game would be, or Skyrim, or any other RPG that you might get into. If you want to invest or love a community, make sure that you love all of the community, unless there's a valid reason as to why. Creating separatism for no reason, or for reasons that are so discernibly small and stupid, is inherently a bad decision, and inherently painful to some people around you, even if you don't think it. I'm not the voice of reason for everything. I'm not the expert the expert on SMT, excuse me. I'm just a fan. But if you watched it or if you care, thanks. If you didn't, hey man, that's fine too. Either way.